On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is talkTV.
A very good evening, my friends, and a big welcome to this special edition of Jeremy Kyle Investigates the NHS. Now, an intrinsic part of being British is undoubtedly state-funded healthcare. Having an NHS that cares for any and all who need it is something we should be truly proud of. But of course, at this point in our lives, the question is it broken? And if so, how can it be fixed? Later in this programme, I'll be joined by NHS GP Dr Rachel Ward, Private Doctor Aaron Ghosh and top paramedic Steve Pratton. But first, let's take a look at the current state of our National Health Service.
The UK's most expensive public service is at breaking point. The National Health Service, our NHS, founded in 1948 with a noble aim that everyone, rich or poor, man, woman or child, can use it or any part of it. Funded by the taxpayer, it's been allocated £153 billion for 2022 to 23 and employs well over 1 million people full-time. But it's time to question the return we get on that investment. The NHS has had its highs and its lows. In 2021, we rightly celebrated the vaccine rollout and clapped for the hard-working staff who were there for us on the front lines. But of course, applause was not enough. The situation was so dire that Sir Captain Tom Moore, a man 20 years older than the NHS itself, walked 100 laps of his garden to raise money. Right now, the service is at its lowest ebb. 1 in 10 A&E patients face a dangerous 12-hour wait half a day before they are ever seen. Ambulance wait times hit a devastating peak in December. If you had a stroke, you'd be waiting for an hour and a half for assistance. The target for these calls is just 18 minutes. Meanwhile, staff strikes have come thick and fast. Doctors, nurses and ambulance drivers all swapping PPE for placards with deadly consequences. Deaths shot up during the first junior doctor strikes. They walked out for 3 days in March, and over the next 2 weeks, excess fatalities almost tripled. And during their strikes in April, more than 196,000 hospital appointments had to be cancelled in England alone. And this is all on top of the 140,000 appointments and operations lost to NHS strikes this winter. There are plenty of problems, but what is the solution? No matter how much money we pump into it, there are always calls for more. So is funding really the issue, or is it time for root and branch reform to save our healthcare system from an untimely death?
Now, I guess it's easy to get distracted by numbers. What really matters, I hope, are the patients. I, like many of you, love the NHS, but sometimes it's fair to say the care doesn't meet the high standards we've come to expect, and people suffer. One of those was Jackie Hulbert. Jackie, a pensioner, a mum of 3 and a grandmother of 6, had a fall in a Leicestershire home at 2 a.m. on July the 10th last year. Her son Matthew arrived home 3 hours later and immediately called an ambulance, but was told they were extremely busy. At 4:30 p.m, my friends, over 11 hours after that first 999 call, an ambulance finally arrived to take her to hospital, where she tragically died 2 days later from an infection. I'm delighted to say her son Matthew joins me now. Matt, so appreciate you being here. Can't imagine what you've been through. Let me ask you this. How many times did you call 999?
So a number of times throughout the day. It was the one thing that you felt you had the power to do during those dreadful 11 hours when my mum was in such a undignified position on her bedroom floor. The one thing you felt you had the power to do was to call 999 again and say, look, my mum is still in this position. Yes, I appreciate she's breathing, but she's in a dire state, is clearly not well. When is an ambulance going to arrive? And we called for an ambulance at 5 a.m. and a paramedic finally arrived at 4 p.m, 11 hours later.
There she is, lying, as you said, on her bedroom floor. You, her son, trying desperately to do the right thing. I've been in that position once myself, and whilst at that moment you understand that the pressure, and it's not the person in the call centre or even the ambulance drivers, we can talk about every reason, it's desperate, isn't it? What sort of things were you saying? She's dying, I need help here.
Absolutely, and the fact was, though, that she was breathing, and so I appreciate she wasn't an absolute emergency, but clearly there was something very wrong with her. She died 2 days later after an infection turned to sepsis.
Did you think at that moment when you were saying, I mean, of course, it's the archetypal question, is she breathing? Yes, she is. All right, then we'll put you back 10 hours. I mean, did you imagine this would lead to her death? Do you blame the NHS for her death?
I blame the system. I think the system is broken. I think the system, whether it be the NHS or social care, isn't working as it should. And families like my own, people like my mum, are losing their lives as a result. And so ultimately, Jeremy, the people in charge of the system are the government. That's just the fact of the matter.
There's no doubt that the NHS, and over the next hour we'll talk about it, it's very easy. People jump up and down and they say the NHS isn't fit for purpose. The truth is it was never set up for a population that is as old as it is and for the sheer numbers. Yeah. But I always go back to people like your mum, like my mum and my dad who have now sadly passed and think they paid in all their lives. They bought into this dream and they've seen this NHS that they've supported emotionally and financially fail them. And that leaves a bitter taste, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And you've said it right. The NHS is, in a way, the epitome of the British dream. And the British dream has let down my mum and so many others. I'm only 44. I think that's quite young to have lost both of my parents. And, I could now face the next 30, or will have to face however long I have left without them. And I still have times where I want to call my mum and say, got some exciting news or a bit sad about this. And I can't do that. And she was... I know we all talk positively about our parents, most of us, but she was a really good person. You saw there her wonderful smile, a wonderful grandmother. Her grandkids miss her so much. And it was devastating, Jeremy. I'll never forget the indignity of those 11 hours. They're seared in my mind.
I think that's the word, isn't it? The indignity. And we'll talk again later. And I know you'll stay and have a listen about, our paramedics who are up against it. They're not responsible for wait times and they get abused and they get physical and verbal threats every time they're out there. But people like your mum, who did everything all of her life for everybody else, and you use the phrase undignified, on her bedroom floor, waiting for the very basic help that the whole idea of the NHS was set up to provide. Just very quickly, difficult. I know you've been a counsellor. I know you've got quite strong views. Is it just money? Because the big debate in this country, gets 153 billion as it stands, is it's not just money, it's also mismanagement of that money. Where do you stand on this, having tragically lost somebody because of part of the NHS failing you?
Well, it's money and it's reform. And we definitely need reform in the social care system as well as in the NHS, because both parts link together. And it was because of both parts failing that my mum was left on her bedroom floor for more than 11 hours. I'll never forget it.
Matthew, really, really appreciate you being here. A very difficult thing, and my love to you and your family. Thank you for coming. And as I said earlier, my friends, it's you, the patients, that rely on the NHS. And if it fails to meet the necessary standards, it's you and me that suffers. So we went out on the streets and asked you, the British public, is the NHS in its current form fit for purpose? Have a watch.
We've recently, a year ago, changed from a doctor's surgery that was absolutely hopeless to a better one, but we're fortunate that we found one that actually does face-to-face appointments. But that's quite a rare thing these days.
My wife had been diagnosed with cancer 9 weeks ago, and the response by the National Health has been immense. She's had the operation, now she's undergoing her first term of chemo, so I can only say, hats off to the NHS.
The people that work there, the facilities, are fit for purpose. What isn't fit for purpose is the funding and the political actions that make it not as fit for purpose as it should be.
The doctors and nurses are incredible. What needs to happen is they need to be properly remunerated for the services they give. We need to have the right number of them because what they do is incredible. They are heroes.
Joining me to discuss this is a panel of, well, they are experts. Top paramedic, good friend of mine, Steve Pratton, on the show. Thank you. NHS GP Dr Rachel Ward and private GP Dr Aaron Ghosh. One and all, thank you so much indeed. Rachel, I want to start with you. I know from talking about this in different segments on JK Live over the last year, naturally, NHS GPs want to defend the very concept of the NHS, and yet we come down to this whole debate about there's 153 billion, you've got one side of the argument that says this isn't enough, we need more. You've got the other side that says this is mismanagement, there are things happening that are not right. When you hear that gentleman Matthew's story about his mother, 76 years of age, paid her stamp all her life, I bet you, and in an undignified way, undignified was the word he uses, dies on the floor in her bedroom, basically gets an infection, dies 2 days later. What's your view of the NHS? Is it fit for purpose, yes or no?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. When you hear stories of people having those horrendous experiences, then you know that it is not functioning in a humane way. It's not functioning at that level of care that we want to offer. I think the concept of the NHS is still world leading, but at the moment it's not functioning in the way it should. We're not offering superb care to the patients that we want to offer. Somebody needs to be brave to admit this and to take it on and to look at the change. And I think that's one of the main problems, that nobody wants to admit this problem.
I think that's a very interesting point, Aaron, because, you know, the clamour for NHS 2.0 grows stronger every day. You know, as medical professionals, it wasn't set up with a population that would live as long as we now live. It certainly wasn't set up to cater for the numbers it now has to cater with. And there's another whole argument about who's allowed the service and who's not. Just strikes me as tragic that people like, you know, Matthew's mother don't get the help, having paid into it for years, that they damn well should get, Aaron.
And also, we've known that this crisis is going to happen. Yeah. So this planning hasn't just happened because of 5 years of bad organisation or one government. It's consecutive government poor planning and mismanagement with no long-term plan. And now we ended up in a crisis situation which COVID really, I think, exacerbated, but showed the world what situation the NHS was in. We didn't have enough ventilators. We didn't have enough beds. We suddenly had to make hospitals in car parks. Why, as one of the richest countries in the world, were we doing that? Because we had such poor planning.
Well, you talk about planning, and I'll come to you in a minute, Stevie, and I really appreciate you being on, because I will not have paramedics or ambulance men or women bashed, and we'll talk about that in a sec. Rachel, my local hospital in Windsor, this is an absolute fact. I think I might have said this to you before, Aaron. When COVID hit, and I'll name them, the Princess Margaret Hospital in Windsor, they paid, or the government paid this private hospital, £10 million for COVID beds. And the rest of the hospital was shrunk into 10%. The rest, 90%, was never used. They had 4 patients. That was £10 million that could be spent on that lady being taken off her bedroom floor. That's people's frustration, right?
Of course, I mean, there was also £4 billion spent on, you know, unusable PPA, which was, you know, yes, there was bad judgment and bad spending during COVID, and I think also there is this concept that, you know, there is no more money to put into the NHS. We need to see this as something that is a long-term investment in the wealth and health of our nation. If we don't have healthy people, people don't work. Everything is just a domino effect. So, you know, we talk about millions, and I appreciate, you know, in individual basis, it's a large amount of money, but nationwide and for our nation's health, it's not. So we need to be looking at the bigger picture, how much we spend per head compared to other, you know, similar countries, and what we're actually willing to put into our health.
Steve, I'll bring you in. Good friend of mine. We've done programmes before. Senior paramedic, we won't say where. The reason I wanted you here today, when you hear a story like Matthew Hulbert's mum, it's very easy, isn't it? Oh, the paramedics, the ambulance people didn't arrive in time. It's not your fault there aren't enough ambulances. And what is it like for you when you get to a situation and you find that there's nothing you can do, irrespective of the abuse you get when you're out anyway?
It's absolutely devastating, Jeremy. And just to pick up on one of the points you say there, where there's not enough ambulances, there often is enough ambulances. It's a fact of life that we've actually got enough resources out on the road. However, when they're facing hours and hours of queuing up at hospital and unable to unload their patients to an A&E department, it means that there's then not enough ambulances to go out and respond to the calls, but they're actually staffed and they're there.
Do me a favour, how demoralising is that?
The reality is there's a 7 to 10% vacancy shortfall across the ambulance service nationally. It takes 2 to 3 years to train a paramedic, and then another 3 years of in-house training to gain the experience. And the reality is most are leaving that join the service as newly qualified paramedics. Most leave within 5 years now. When I started, it was 30 to 40 year career span. Now most are getting burnt out. Stress, anxiety and depression is at an all-time high, and the staff are leaving because of this. So we've got an ongoing recruitment and retention problem.
We'll talk more about that later, Steve, thank you. Would that be fair to say that feeling, depression, tiredness, demoralisation, is true across the GP spectrum as well?
Absolutely. I mean, the statistics in general practice are horrendous. So 1 in 4 GPs knows a colleague who has died by suicide. I mean, that is a shocking figure. Wow. The amount of burnout, mental illness among GPs is incredible. And even if you've not got to that level of severity, I know very few people who are not suffering with severe levels of stress and actually just not wanting to go to work. So it's really not a good place to be, and it's no surprise that people don't want to join the profession and people are leaving.
Just very quickly, Aaron, I haven't got long. Is that why you went private?
I think the GP model itself needs to be looked at. When I joined, it was a partnership model, and what we were looking at were GPs bought into practices and being part of it. Now it's much more of a salaried. So they're not part of their practice. They're just doing a job and going home. And the onslaught and the work they've got really is demoralising. So I left back in 2011 because I wanted to do a better job. I cared. And the NHS runs off people who care, who actually go above and beyond what the job entails them to do. And we need to keep those people.
Fantastic. For now, stay there. Thank you so much. Next on JK Investigates, as more and more GP surgeries fall into special measures, we ask, can our local services be saved? Do not go anywhere. I'm coming back in 3.
Welcome to the talk. That book has done some serious damage.
You're
stretching it.
You can say whatever gender you are, but your sex, you're male or you're female.
All right, JJ, what's he become? Fabulous.
But Rishi Sunak, he sets out this 5-point plan. What has it achieved so far? Nothing.
When we say believe women, take them at their word. I'm sick of apologies. Keep watching this show.
He's back, and he's uncensored. Debating the breaking news and talking to the biggest names. Piers Morgan is live every week with a host of stars. Uncompromising, unmissable, and uncensored. And remember,
if you're thinking it, we're talking about it.
Piers Morgan Uncensored, Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on talkTV.
Dearly beloved, let us pray. Yeah, careful. Who are you praying to exactly?
Rishi's like some kind of submarine prime minister. You're making the case here now.
A MILF stands for Mother I'd Like to... I'm not going to say the next word.
Pop the kettle on. This is the royal tea.
Could you keep quiet? I'm trying to read a book here.
Welcome back to Jeremy Kyle Investigates the NHS. So next, how much money do we spend on the NHS and where does it all go? I'll do my best to break it down. The NHS is basically funded with £153 billion. Most of that funding goes on local health services. That's £107.8 billion. A further 29.8 billion quid is spent on directly commissioning service. That means, this is great, working out what is needed, where it's needed and how to get it there. It's interesting. 6.1 billion quid goes to other system funding. That's apparently all the other bits and bobs. That also includes 3.4 billion quid for increased pension contributions. Here's my favourite. 3.8 billion goes on the Service Development Fund. This is important. That fund is earmarked for improvements in cancer, maternity care and other priority services. But here's the one. 3.2 billion quid goes to NHS England's central admin and programme. That's the vaccination programme, its supply chain, and a further 2.3 billion goes to elective services. It's a recovery fund. Apparently that looks into modernising the NHS, so more pre-surgical support at home, you get early discharge and home rehabilitation. One of their main things is, we'll encourage you to use apps. Brilliant. So basically working to take the pressure off hospitals and in-person care. Rachel Ward is still with me, as is Aaron Ghosh. It will always come down to a debate about money. In this country, the great British public, and I will take your side, have, I think, always assumed and believed that the NHS would be there for them. Increasingly, people can see frailties. However, I just want to nail my colours to the mast. When my old girl had a stroke, when my old man collapsed, you would not find anywhere in the goddamn world anywhere better. But once you're inside the system, you know, the queues on trolleys for 12 hours in corridors, that lady not getting an ambulance, you know, bed blocking. It's demoralising, isn't it? What would you do? If I gave you 153 billion quid, would you be at me for more or would you spend it more wisely?
Look, I think, unfortunately, one of the things, you know, we look at how we can get more efficiency and stuff, but actually what needs to happen is that there are certain things that are restricting that development. So, for example, our IT systems are completely outdated. Our estates are completely outdated. You know, you can't make a hospital more efficient if half of its operating theatres are not fit for purpose. So there needs to be a huge kind of 10, 15-year plan as to how we move that forward, and then we can look at making more efficiency.
But is it the size? By the time, if you spent 10 or 15 years, Aaron, updating those very systems Rachel's just talked about, the population would have shot up again and it wouldn't be effective at that point. Would that be fair?
I think the worry we have with the NHS now is that we're already at a crisis situation. Throwing money at it doesn't make it more efficient, doesn't make it any better, doesn't bring back the doctors that we need to have. It doesn't make patients' medication cheaper. It just means we have a bit more money to maybe do more of these sticking plaster solutions like training up pharmacists or making the
Oh, yeah, that's the latest one, isn't it? Yeah.
It's so scary that you think this is going to be an alternative plan to having more GPs, because it just isn't. There is a great deal pharmacists can do, and they're fantastic, but they're not the difference from having to speak to a doctor. And the public wants doctors actually to be there in their surgeries. They want appointments. They don't want a receptionist to tell them, your problem isn't that important today, I'm going to triage you. They want that discussion with the GP.
This is interesting. So 2,000 less GPs than there were at this point last year. Why are so many quitting? You talked before about demoralisation. You know, you'll get certain people in this country go, hold on a minute, you're earning all that money, you only want to do 3 days a week. I mean, how long do you... Give us an average day. How many patients are you supposed to see? How long do you get?
Sure. So I start working at 7:30, where I start looking through my paperwork, so blood results, picking out urgent things that have come in. I'll try and get ahead with a few prescriptions and things. I'll start seeing patients at 8:30, and I will, on an average day, see at least 50 patients.
Wow.
In the middle of the day, again, more paperwork. At the end of the day, more paperwork. I will then frequently go home, log on, have a partners meeting till 10 p.m.
Right, this is no criticism of the GPs. I know from talking to you as a mate in the past that one of the things that matters to you that you went private is that it wasn't about targets, it wasn't about I've only got 12 minutes, you could do the job efficiently. And I throw back at you, Rachel, are they getting the best of Dr. Rachel Ward?
Not always. And I think, yes, we are, you know, we have to be honest about that. And actually, yeah, we need more of us to deliver that care. But it's very difficult when people still knocking at the door. You've got 70 people on the, you know, on the phone queue on a Monday morning. It's very difficult to say no to people.
111 was supposed to take the pressure off before you decided to go private. I had a situation with Oliver with 111, and I'm not being disrespectful. He was about 11, the bloke on the end of the phone, and he must have been reading a script, OK? I'm being completely honest. Those sort of frustrations, that led you to go private. How long do you get with each patient?
I have half an hour with each patient, because I think, actually, when you look at what the BMA recommend and what you look at when you see GPs and what they say, at least 20 minutes to go through those problems. I don't tell a patient one problem, one appointment, because Why? If they've got that chance to see the doctor, why not get that time to speak to them? And we would all love to do that. And that has been recommendations that have come through from the BMA for a long time and the RCGP. We know we need more time. I absolutely admire what Rachel does because I think I'd be totally burnt out if I continued doing that. I know you don't work full time, but our colleagues who do work that, 5 days a week, who are working like that, that's unsustainable.
But what does it say, Rach, as well, that in a survey, and this is a factual fact, 1 in 3 people in the last 3 years has had a private GP appointment. They are turning their back on the NHS because they're not... And I'm talking to you, a GP, who must be... When you read that and go, what am I doing? People are quitting, I don't get enough time, I haven't got logistically the right support. Why do you keep going? Because it's part of who you are, right?
I keep going because I fundamentally believe the NHS is the right way. That
Thought about going private?
No, I haven't. I really do believe that it doesn't matter how much you earn or where you come from. I think everyone deserves that same level of high care, and that's why I keep bashing away at it.
And I admire you, but they're not getting it with the NHS. And I want to throw it to you, Aaron. Do you feel like you abandon people by setting up a private practice and charging whatever for half an hour? Whilst that might be perceived as a good service, there will be plenty watching this who'll go, well, it's all right to go and see him, but I can't even get a goddamn appointment with her, let alone afford him.
I think the difference has happened is when I started, it wasn't a very busy practice. But now I have NHS GPs referring to me for things like medicals, for things that they know they're not going to be able to get done because they've got to prioritise that onslaught of patients. So there are things that we may bother the GP with, that, workplace medicals, things that just need to be signed off, just entrances to going into a gym that needs to be signed by a GP. Why are you bothering the NHS with this type of stuff? It's not that you're sick, but of course they need to do that for their workplaces.
Right, we're going to talk about this later on because one of the criticisms, and we have to turn this round, is that something like 650,000 appointments a month last year weren't seen through. So, I mean, there's another thing. The British public needs to take responsibility. Yeah. I really admire what he's saying. I understand where he's coming from. But if you are, I mean, what was the situation? My father-in-law needed to have his gallbladder out. We're talking 8 months, right? We convinced him to have it done privately. Why would he wait 33 weeks of untold worry and misery if now he's lucky enough to be able to afford a few quid?
And there are people with insurance, there are people who have got the means, and why aren't they able to use that? And of course, we need to have those individuals who can take that burden off the NHS, or who make those decisions to go, do you know what, I'm not going to bother my GP with this, I'm going to go down an alternative route because I want it quicker. And that ability to have choice is also a really important part of the market. And you will see private hospitals now all have private GPs.
We will talk about privatisation later, but just to finish, Rachel, on this segment, it's something you believe in. You admit that it's not at its best, that it needs changing. Can you see that happening in our lifetime? Because I'm with you. This isn't going to happen in a heartbeat.
I think there needs to be some really honest conversations about the NHS. I think many people take it for granted. And it's really interesting when you occasionally get a much older patient now who remembers pre-NHS times.
Absolutely.
And they genuinely do not take it for granted.
Rachel, Aaron, for now, thank you. Next on JK Investigates, the emergency services overwhelmed. We'll go back to Steve after the break and say, what's it like out there? We're back in 3. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the talk. That book has done some serious damage.
You're stretching it.
You can say whatever gender you are, but your sex, you're male or you're female.
All right, JJ, what's he become? Fabulous.
But Rishi Sunak, he sets out this 5-point plan. What has it achieved so far? Nothing.
When we say believe women, take them at their word. I'm sick of apologies. Keep watching this go.
He's back, And he's uncensored. Debating the breaking news and talking to the biggest names. Piers Morgan is live every week with a host of stars. Uncompromising, unmissable, and uncensored. And remember,
if you're thinking it, we're talking about it.
Piers Morgan Uncensored, Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on talkTV.
Dearly beloved, let us pray. Yeah, careful. Who are you praying to exactly?
Rishi's like some kind of submarine prime minister. You're making the case here now.
A MILF stands for Mother I'd Like to. I'm not going to say the next word.
Pop the kettle on. This is the royal tea.
Could you keep quiet? I'm trying to read a book here.
This is talkTV.
Welcome back to Jeremy Kyle Investigates the NHS. Now, an incredible amount of people rely on the NHS every day. But when it comes to matters of life and death, there are unfortunately those the emergency services cannot reach on time. Joining me now is Naomi Rees-Izzet. Her son Jamie tragically died waiting for an ambulance after having a heart attack on New Year's Eve. The ambulance took over 17 minutes to arrive, which was sadly too late for Jamie, whose brain had been starved of oxygen by that point. Naomi, thank you so much indeed. I know we've spoken before and you're an inspirational lady. Do you blame the NHS for your son's tragic passing?
No, we don't blame anyone. We've never blamed anyone. And when paramedics reached Jamie and when Jamie was in hospital, he was taken care of by the NHS. But 17 minutes to reach him was, in our opinion, treated as a luxury that Jamie just never got. His friends were screaming for, where's the ambulance? Why is it not here? There was a defibrillator nearby, locked inside a school that they couldn't access. And to think that he laid there waiting all that time and his life could have been saved is the most infuriating feeling. And he was the most lovely boy. He deserved to be reached and he deserved to still be here today.
What's your reaction to my good friend Steve Pratton saying before the break there are enough ambulances, but poor ambulance men and women are sat outside hospitals waiting to put patients in before they come back out? This is a systematic failing of logistical planning, isn't it?
On the night that Jamie collapsed, there was 10 ambulances queuing outside University Hospital, Coventry, some of them for over 6 hours. It was New Year's Day, early hours of the morning. I get it. It's a really busy time and it's a lonely time, but a third of ambulances were visiting mental health patients in the community. Jamie was an emergency. He was a Category 1 patient. His heart wasn't beating and they were screaming for help and ambulances couldn't get to him. They could hear on the radio that there was an 18-year-old in cardiac arrest 15 miles away. Our ambulances were taken away from Rugby over the last 5 years, even our last standby ambulance just 4 months before Jamie collapsed. Had that have still been there, it would have been parked 3 minutes from where Jamie collapsed.
How do you not get angry?
I do get angry. I get angry on a Sunday. All my anger's in a jar and I talk and campaign for Jamie and I want things to change because I don't want other families to go through what we've gone through. But on a Sunday, I scream and shout, usually at my poor husband. But there's no point being angry. What we want is for somebody to sit up and take notice.
It always strikes me the greatest thing about this country, and we hear so much about, negativity. We're talking tonight, and I'm delighted to wear your badge. The Our J Foundation is all about, you set it up with your husband, it's all about installation of defibrillators in locations that could prove to be life-saving, right?
Yeah, so...
I don't mean this in the wrong way, I admire you, but it's not really your responsibility. Is it not the health service's responsibility to have those defibrillators?
It is, but we can't rely on funding from anyone, from government, to get these defibrillators out there. If that defibrillator near to where Jamie collapsed had just been on the other side of the wall, he would probably still be here today. We set up Jamie's foundation a few weeks after we lost him purely to put that one defibrillator on the outside of the local school. It was Jamie's high school. And within 24 hours, the amazing people of our town of Rugby had raised £3,000. So we kept going, and we've just hit £100,000 in 16 months. That just goes to show what people can do if they put the effort in. And yet we've written endless emails and letters to government and our health secretary and not even had so much as an acknowledgement.
And I know you've worked with cross-parliamentary groups, they don't even respond to you. When you talk about target times for strokes and heart attacks, yes, defibrillators are very important. You've heard our guests so far say that this needs strategic planning, probably cross-party planning. Somebody needs to say, this isn't going to work for 10 or 15 years, and you are part of that. And I guess also, being honest, your grief you can put in a box and deal with, as you say, on a Sunday, because you've got an idea of how you can help and how you can, if you like, keep his memory alive, right?
This is how we get up in the morning. What would we have to get up in the morning for if we didn't have this? Jamie's not here for us to take care of him anymore. So putting his defibrillators out there, which have already saved 2 lives in the last year.
Two lives?
2 lives.
Amazing.
And when Jamie became an organ donor, we knew he saved 5 lives on the night we said goodbye to him, so we knew what his legacy was going to be, and all we are is his voice. He's carried on saving lives, and I'm sure he'll save many lives in the future. Like you say, shouldn't be down to grieving families, but this is our way of looking after Jamie still.
Can I tell you something? I don't know how you do it, because I would be absolutely hopeless, but I've interviewed enough people like you over the years, and the admiration I have for you, because you're putting your grief into something really constructive. You've just installed your 51st defibrillating machine, already saved 2 lives. That's a fantastic. Naomi, thank you so much. Always a pleasure, and we will keep supporting our J Foundation. And of course, Jamie's tragic case is just one of the many that use the NHS every day, and the numbers are immense. Let's have a look at a day in the life of the NHS. 1 million people or more attend a GP appointment. More than 250,000 people attend an outpatient's appointment. Over 30,000 people daily call 999. And almost 45,000 people attend major A and E departments. A man that can give a view of exactly what it's like for NHS emergency response joins me now, my good friend Steve Pratton, back on the show. Stevie, difficult for you, stood at the back of the studio listening to Naomi. You heard Matthew's story. Let's go back to what I was talking about. We did a show some years ago, and I wanted to say this tonight. I spent 2 or 3 days with you guys. The abuse, the systematic abuse, physical and verbal, that you get trying to do your job in the most difficult circumstances must be massively disheartening. You have to be special people.
Yeah, it is, you're right. It's very disheartening. And you can thoroughly understand if somebody's been waiting many hours for an ambulance to come, no matter what category of emergency it is, the frustration builds up and builds up and builds up. And the more times they ring 999 and say, where's my ambulance? It doesn't speed the ambulance up, but they get more frustrated by it. And then when you walk through the door, you often find that you're the sort of first line of attack aimed at you. And we have to obviously be professional and put these people at ease and reassure them and get on with the job in hand. But it's really difficult when you're facing that day in and day out.
I mean, every hour, I believe, ambulance staff are being abused. Is that right?
Yes, it seems to be the case. It's certainly a lot more common than it used to be. Going back in the day, you used to be able to walk into a pub where a fight was breaking out and people would say, oh, stand back, the ambulance people are here. Nowadays, you're more likely to get attacked.
Every day last year, check this is staggering, 32 ambulance staff were abused or attacked, more than 1 every hour of every day during the whole of last year, totalling almost 12,000 staff. Are you overwhelmed out there?
We are overwhelmed, it's fair to say. The workload is absolutely immense. It's unprecedented. We talk about winter pressures. We used to use the term winter pressures. It was our busy season and we knew that. Now winter pressures are the same call volume and more, day in, day out, 365 days a year.
So you're the paramedic, you're on the ground, you're trying to save lives. You're being hampered by, as we said earlier, either money or... Who do you blame?
Well, it's difficult to pinpoint a blame. It seems to be a systemic failure across the system, really. When you look at the whole process of an ambulance is not free to be dispatched to a call. When it is free, it's dispatched. It picks a patient up. Then there's no space on the department in the A&E because the A&E department can't move their patient onto a ward because the ward can't discharge their patient into the community. So it's a whole system failing that needs a total reform.
Do you remember as well that it was touched upon earlier in the discussion, I don't know who by, about how now the ambulance services are being called to anything. Do you remember we did the same mental health patient 5 times in one night, which meant the people on the floor, the elderly lady or the young man, we kept going back and it's so much that you have to do, and that would overwhelm anybody. Well, my question is, I mean, morale must be on the floor.
Morale's at an all-time low, it's fair to say. It's something that has been difficult for some time now. It's got worse, and these increased waiting times are only compounding this. And this is what I was saying earlier about recruitment and retention is a real problem for us.
Do you need to pay more? What needs to change? What's the biggest impediment for you that stops the ambulance service? Because you've had a bit of bad press in terms of, you know, you want this, you want that, you want the other. And as you quite rightly say, you're always a target when you get there. But let's not forget, men and women, paramedics are out there trying to save our lives. What's the biggest impediment to your service to not be able to provide the care, if you like? What's causing the biggest problem?
I would say the bureaucracy involved, red tape and bureaucracy, the difficulty in changing procedures and how slowly things move. We've seen a definite decline since going back to 2015. Take from that what you will, where the services that we're able to offer have really declined, which is really challenging for our staff. I'm a representative for Unison, and we try and support the staff the best we can and promote the health and well-being of the staff, campaigning for fair pay, fair terms and conditions. But it's not actually about the pay. Ambulance staff are actually not that disgruntled about pay. The whole thing is about improving terms and conditions, making a better working environment, meaning that we can keep the staff and respond to the patients better and deliver the care that we want to. At the end of the day, every paramedic joined the job to help people, and that's all we want to do.
So from an outsider's point of view, we would talk about, you know, it's not about more money, it's about reorganisation, it's about waiting times, it's about, you know, bed blocking and all that. In terms of just bringing it to Naomi's story, I mean, it would be fair to say that ambulance waiting times for strokes and heart attack victims, what was the average on a stroke last year? 90 minutes? That's I mean, my old girl had a stroke. You haven't got 90 minutes, have you?
No, absolutely not. It's what we call a time-critical incident that should be responded to, conveyed to hospital and handed over in a definitive place of care within 60 minutes for a stroke, absolutely. And very similar for a heart attack as well. And we're struggling, even with these type of Category 1 patients, the most critically ill patients, we're still often arriving at A&E departments and being told to wait outside because there's no room available to take a patient inside. And these are life-threatening emergencies.
What's the answer, Stevie?
Well, it's not for me to say. I don't know the answer, but I think we need to be campaigning to government. We need to be getting some reforms in place and having a total overhaul of the whole system.
Stay there, because one of the things that most people talk about is the way to perhaps improve the NHS, right, is privatisation, right? Is that the answer, part or total? We'll talk about that in 3. We're coming right back.
Welcome to the talk. That book has done some serious damage.
You're stretching it.
You can say whatever gender you are, but your sex, you're male or you're female.
All right, JJ, what's he become? Fabulous.
But Rishi Sunak, he sets out this 5-point plan. What has it achieved so far? Nothing.
When we say believe women, take them at their word. I'm sick of apologies. Keep watching this show.
He's back, and he's uncensored. Debating the breaking news and talking to the biggest names. Piers Morgan is live every week with a host of stars. Uncompromising, unmissable, and uncensored. And remember,
If you're thinking it, we're talking about it.
Piers Morgan Uncensored, Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on talkTV.
Dearly beloved, let us pray. Yeah, careful. Who are you praying to exactly?
Rishi's like some kind of submarine prime minister. You're making the case here now.
A MILF stands for Mother I'd Like to... I'm not going to say the next word.
Pop the kettle on. This is the royal tea.
Could you keep quiet? I'm trying to read a book here.
Welcome back. You're watching Jeremy Kyle Investigates the NHS. And as we've heard throughout this show, the NHS is at breaking point. Some say it's past it. But would tonight the answer be privatising the service? Would that improve the health of patients? Now, we're constantly hearing our health service is underfunded. So the big question is, does the UK lag behind other countries' health spending? Well, between 2010 and 2019, the average spend per person here in the UK was over £3,000, just over. In France, where they have a universal healthcare system paid for by government health insurance, it's over 3,600 quid. Sweden, Denmark and Iceland all spend well over double the UK. And it's not just Europe. Australia's outlay is almost twice ours at 5,400 quid. And in the United States, they spend over a whopping 10,900 quid. That's over 3.5 times the UK spending. Well, I'm sure it wouldn't surprise you, right, that a lot of those spending more than the UK have at the least part privatised healthcare systems. And I'm sure that no one watching would advocate for a system like the United States, where it's seemingly the Wild West. But would it help if those high earners sought treatment elsewhere and left the NHS to those that desperately need it? The panel are back, and I want to start with you straight away, Rachel. Should people who can afford, in part, some private health care, be forced to pay for it so that the others who can't, who need it, will benefit?
I don't think so. I don't think it's that straightforward. So to start with, I think we have to remember that there are some fantastic private hospitals, and I think I am not against private healthcare. I think when people have insurance or people choose to pay, that's very important to remove the burden. However, there are some people that, for example, very complex problems, very ill, they need to be in an NHS hospital, whatever their earning capacity is, whatever their background, they need to be in an NHS hospital to have that multi-team approach and all the backup. I think it's also really, really important to say when we talk about private care, people think, oh, I've got private health insurance, I don't need to worry about the NHS, and it's not true. If you get knocked down by a bus, who's coming? It's an NHS ambulance. If you go to a trauma centre, it's an NHS ambulance. And if you're in the unfortunate position that you need a palliative care nurse coming to your house, or you're going to a hospice, it is the NHS.
I am completely with you, but I guess what I'm asking, I'll bring Aaron in, is if you say I earn over 150k, right? And you're absolutely right, if you get knocked over, the ambulance is an NHS ambulance and the trauma, all of that. But if you've got to have an operation, if you've got to have a hip replacement, if you've got to have, I don't know what, and you can afford it, would that help that sort of part privatisation idea. Would that mean there was more in the pot, if you like, so that those who are suffering don't? I mean, I know it brings in means testing and all that. Would that be a fairer way?
I don't think it would. And the reason is the inverse health proportion means that the poorest of us actually needs the health service more. The elderly will use more of the health service. They won't be earning that much money. So it wouldn't actually make any difference if we tax the richer to pay for the poorer. It wouldn't really make a huge difference to make sure that people who earn that sort of money are able to do it. Many of them actually already do. Many of them do have health insurance. Many of their companies will provide that. So it won't really take any burden off the NHS. So privatisation in that respect, where the rich will end up paying to come out of the NHS, won't make a difference.
I'll tell you what we touched upon earlier, and Steve, I will get to you, I promise. But Rachel, we touched upon this earlier. Of 103 million outpatient appointments booked in 2021-22, 7.6% did not attend. This equates to an average of 650,000 monthly appointments. Now, I'm just going to throw it out there. If you had to pay a deposit that you got back if you turned up, what's 10 quid for 6? I mean, it's billions, isn't it? Would that not... I mean, that must be frustrating as a GP, private or NHS, that there you've got your day and people don't turn up. That's appalling. Should they be penalised?
It's interesting, and certainly I don't see as many people not turning up these days.
Oh, right,
Certainly
okay.
been an improvement. Those figures are obviously, correct for hospital appointments. What I think would be interesting is if people had to pay a small sum, they would think about it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I get so many people who are on urgent GP call list wanting an urgent appointment for something which is very minor, which could be dealt with by going to the pharmacist. And if you've actually got to think, am I doing the right thing? I think you're more likely to do that.
Listen, we asked the public, do you want a private healthcare system? We took to the streets. Have a watch.
We have a very good local GP surgery. I've never had private healthcare. I've always been with the NHS. And I know other people have difficulties, but I've always had good experiences. I think we shouldn't be taxing people who are higher earners. I think we should be supporting our NHS because we need it, and I'm very grateful to it.
They're not given the help and the funding and the assistance that they need from the government. And it just feels like it's being trodden on. They're trying to get rid of the NHS. It's how it feels to me unfortunately, as a regular user of the NHS. It feels like it's being, like I say, trampled on, and they're trying to get rid of it, and it's just not fair.
I think one way to take the burden off the NHS would be to tackle the upper management. It seems to me there are more chiefs than Indians. Let's get down to what's important, health.
I think a lot of people depend on the national health, and it's great. It's an evolving thing, More people we get, the more money we need. And it has to be funded, somewhere or another.
Obviously, we're a fantastic institution that's got hugely, obviously, out of control. I think everyone knows that. It's almost unanswerable how to solve it. It's one of those incredibly difficult situations. I hear and listen to all these sides of it. We've obviously got to go to some sort of part funding, people are going to have to pay. It's going to be part private.
They're basically trying to privatise it, and we know what happens from places like America, that then it becomes even more of a two-tier system than it is now. We have relatives in America, and it's dismal.
Interesting that, Steve, if I can bring you in. Comments there like, it's breaking down, we need part privatisation, and then you say that man who quoted, I don't want a two-tier system like the United States. What's your view?
No, I agree with my colleagues. I don't think privatisation is the answer. I think privatisation is a slippery slope. I think privatisation erodes terms and conditions for the NHS staff. If you think about going to see a specialist, there's a finite amount of specialists. You want to see somebody in the NHS or private that's at the top of their game. There's a finite amount of people at consultant level, at all levels. If you take them out of the NHS to work in private practice, there's nobody replacing them.
But isn't the better idea for the NHS and the private practice to work together? Is that not from all of this? And I know we could sit here for another 4 days and we could say it's great and it's where you go to, but it gets 153 billion and people are missing out. We've heard some terrible stories tonight. And it's frustrating, isn't it? Because the very essence of the NHS, as we started off, Rachel, and all of you who work in it know, well, you used to until you sold yourself, you know that it's because you care. And because it's an intrinsic part of us. But I'm going to say the most outrageous thing for a reason. Is it available to too many people? I mean, are we actually looking after people we shouldn't be looking after?
No, I don't think we are, and I think actually, I'm proud of the fact that even if somebody is visiting the UK and they walk in to my surgery and they are ill, they can access healthcare. And actually, I think as a nation, a first world country, that's something we should be aiming for. I dread, getting ill if I go to the States. Do we want people to feel like that coming to the UK? I don't.
No, but what if the people, and I'm not trying to have an argument with you, but what about if the people from the UK have paid their taxes like that lady for 40 years and they miss out because somebody on holiday, or, and let's not get into a big debate, somebody who shouldn't be in this country is getting healthcare. There is an argument on that side as well.
I think it's a drop in the ocean. When you look at the numbers, I think it's pretty irrelevant.
Aaron, this is an interesting one for you. The NHS pays for private healthcare for its patients to the tune of over $12 billion a year. Surely that's an expense we could save, isn't it?
I think the thing that we think about is the NHS isn't just the NHS. Private healthcare is already rapidly involved and enveloped in it. You mentioned earlier how much private hospitals are being paid to hold NHS contracts. We already know outsourcing happens. So we have private companies going in and taking NHS lists, doing scanning services, doing theatre services, doing scopes. So we know that already the NHS has been prioritised and privatised for these companies. And we know people who get on those lists and get those jobs very, very quickly. So I think it isn't the NHS that we love to have, but the point is, should it be free at point of access for patients? And that's where I think we're all agreed it must stay like that.
Listen, it's an amazing thing to have sat here and discussed it. We could, as I said, and from a paramedic's point of view, a GP, the NHS, a private GP, you care. And that's the most important thing. We all agree and know there needs to be reform. But as you quite rightly said, I think it should be planned, cross-party, and think about it. Listen, thank you to all of you guys, and thank you for watching. That's all I have time for tonight, that special edition of Jeremy Kyle Investigates the NHS. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you very soon. Take care. Ta-ra.
Welcome to the talk. That book has done some serious damage.
You're stretching it.
You can say whatever gender you are, but your sex, you're male or you're female.
All right, JJ, what's he become? Fabulous.
But Rishi Sunak, he sets out this 5-point plan. What has it achieved so far? Nothing.
When we say believe women, take them at their word. I'm sick of apologies. Keep watching this show.
He's back, and he's uncensored. Debating the breaking news and talking to the biggest names. Piers Morgan is live every week with a host of stars. Uncompromising, unmissable, and uncensored. And remember,
If you're thinking it, we're talking about it.